you really have to find out who you are.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen overnight. It can take some time. But you have to figure out who you want to be on camera, and you have to figure out who you are on camera. And sometimes those are different things, but you have to find a way to merge those two. The other thing I would say is there's always another take.
On cam ready in 3, 2, 1.
This is Unknown to Known, an on-cam ready presentation. I'm Jamie Maglietta. Today's guest and I go way back. We crossed paths at Fox News Channel, where he was doing something most journalists never really get to do, reporting live from a war zone. He was embedded with the U.S. and Afghan forces, and he was covering the Arab Spring in Libya. He spent so many years on the ground in Jerusalem as a Middle East correspondent. At the time, I was working at Fox News Edge, and I was producing Fox Extra, which aired abroad on Fox News Channel and Fox Business Network. Fox Business Network was maybe added a little after this point. But he was a wonderful guy, and I really enjoyed watching him report from the ground on so many different issues across the globe. You know, as journalists, we get to produce history in the making, cover what's happening in real time. And now that I'm out, I've said this before, I sometimes feel like I haven't produced my own life. And so I really wanted the chance to talk to him and see how he's produced his life since our crossing at Fox News Channel. He left television news in 2018, right before COVID. Timing. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to build something different. Since then, he's become a podcast creator, host, and developer, producing work for iHeartRadio and Cast Media, including a 12-part true crime series about corruption inside FIFA and a show about presidential campaigns that never made it to the White House. If you're enjoying this show and what we have to offer, please follow this podcast on your podcast platform of choice, or find us on YouTube, where I offer even more content to really help you online and turn your thought leadership into content. This is Unknown to Known, and today we're talking to Conor Powell.
And I got into journalism pretty late. I worked in sort of politics and not really politics, but I worked in Richmond, Virginia, doing advocacy for the tech industry in the early 2000s. I went to graduate school. I worked in the sort of consulting IT world for a few years. And then I really wanted, at the height of the Iraq War, to get into journalism with a goal of being a foreign correspondent.
Mm-hmm.
And my first job was in Yakima, Washington. I was doing local news reporting there and trying to figure it out. I remember the first time I did a live shot, the cameraman thought it would be funny to say, "You're on," and I wasn't on. And then he did that 2 more times. And then there was a time when he said, "You're on," and I didn't believe him. And I was really on camera. And that was my first live shot. It was a total debacle. It was a learning experience. So it's why you go to small markets and things like that to learn. And I got really good advice early on, which was, you need to find out who you are on camera, and you need to be that person. It doesn't mean that you have to be necessarily yourself, because there's multiple parts of people, right? But you need to find out who your personality is on camera, and what your energy is, what your tone is, how you want to present yourself. And it does take some practice. It does take some figuring out. You can copy people, you can try things, but ultimately you've got to find out sort of what your style is and how you want to be presented. And it definitely takes some time. And my second job was in Washington, D.C. I was covering politics on Capitol Hill in 2008. And I still didn't know who I was as a reporter. It wasn't until I went to Afghanistan as a freelancer and then got hired by Fox that I started to sort of figure it out. It also coincided with, I really started to know my material really well, what I was reporting about. I was living in Afghanistan. I got to know people there, not only in the military, in the State Department, expats, but also locals. I was able to bring in all of the things that I was living and experiencing into my reporting. And I think the more you know your information, the easier it is to be yourself. So if you're just you just want to be on camera, that's the hardest sort of transition to be, which is like, I just want to be on TV, or I just want to be on camera. And you need to really find out what's the why. Why do you want to do it? What are you trying to convey? And then what do you want to present on camera?
And to that point, like, what I'll tell people is, you need to know who you're serving. Who's that
Yeah.
audience? Talk right to them, because if you don't have that why, like you're saying, and you don't know who you're serving and the reason behind it, you're going to fall flat and you're going to burn out, because if you don't have that passion to light you up to keep going, it gets really hard. And so when you transition from, the smaller markets to Fox News Channel, what was that like?
So it was interesting. I mean, I always tell people I never worked harder than
Mhm.
I did in local news. Because when you're a one man band reporter in Yakima,
Yep.
Washington, you are not only doing multiple stories a day, you're responsible for coming up all of those stories. You've got to write them up for the web. You also have to edit your stories, get them on air by 5 o'clock, drive around. And I mean, this was we had MapQuest, but we didn't have like iPhones and
Yeah.
Google Maps. And so I'm driving around the central part of Washington State and places I don't know. And then when you come back and you finish your day, people are calling the office and saying, I didn't like that report, or when's Jeopardy on, or when is the sporting event of the night going to be
Mhm.
on, or, you really ought to cover my grandson. He is a fantastic basketball player at the local high school. And
Mhm.
I never worked harder than I did when I was in local news. Now, I worked
Mhm.
way longer hours and way more stressful hours than when I was in Afghanistan or in Jerusalem or Libya, wherever, when I was at Fox, because the stakes are much higher. But there was a support network there. There were great
Mhm.
producers, there were great cameramen, there were great editors, there were executives, there were people booking travel. And so you were working very hard on your part of the team. And it really is a team at the network level.
Mhm.
TV doesn't happen without a cameraman, doesn't happen without an editor, it doesn't happen out with engineers. And
Mhm.
so at that level, you really do have a lot of people who are helping you out. And your job is to take the information, work on a script so you know what you're saying. And sometimes it's on the fly, sometimes you have a chance to think about it. But at that level, at Fox, at CNN, at the network level, you are working with a lot of great people, but you have to be really dialed in what your job is, which is to
Mhm.
convey that information in very short periods of time in the most interesting and informative way. And I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why people start off in local news often is you sort of learn all these skills, you understand how to build stories with pictures, and then by the time you get to the network level, you really understand what you have to do in order to make that 1 minute, 2 minute segment work for the viewer.
And 1 minute to 2 minute, that's what you're seeing on social, guys. It's this mindset of we need to produce it all, we have to do it all. It stems back to early journalism. If you wanna be on camera, your who, what, why, when, and where, your how,
Yeah.
that all applies now to social media and creating YouTube shows and creating podcasts. And in the beginning, you are doing it all on your own. And I remember in college, I was a reporter's producer as an intern, right? And I did this for almost a year because he just couldn't he needed me.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. And those deadlines all day long trying to crank out stories is essentially what many people find themselves doing now, to have a podcast, to have a
Yeah.
YouTube channel, to have social media. And it's hard. But as journalists, as producers, we come to that with the capabilities of being able to crank out as much content as needed to create a brand, to build someone's story. How have you positioned yourself since Fox, and any of those skills, do they all come into play with what you do now, and how?
Yeah, hundreds. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, without a doubt. I started looking at journalism to making the transfer from sort of the corporate world
Mhm.
to journalism about 2004, 2005. It was around that period of time. It was just sort of height of the Iraq War. And I remember sort of trying to figure out what is the news world going to look like. And this is the
Yeah.
sort of beginning of, and this is pre social media, really.
Mhm.
But I remember talking to a couple journalists. I just would cold call people and ask them for advice, and 10 people wouldn't respond, but one would. And one of them said, like, your world as a journalist is going to look totally different than mine. I've been doing this for 20 years, through the 80s and 90s, and I just do one thing. I write and I maybe, talk on the radio or talk on TV. But your world, you're going to have to shoot, you're going to have to edit, you're going to have to do all these things you never thought you would have to do. And so just embrace it. You're going to have to learn it. And that's, if you're a content creator today, like you're talking about, you are probably going to have to learn how to shoot some video, how
Mhm.
to pop up in places you never thought you would have to pop up, but how to convey information, write something out quickly, and present that to your viewers. So that was something that, you work on in local news. You're trying lots of different things. You're doing it also at the network level. And then when I got into podcasting after I left Fox and moved back to the US, it was a whole nother medium that I had never worked on. I know how to write, I know how to tell a story,
Mhm.
but it was all audio. And I had done radio before, but I had never done long storytelling on radio. I mean, that doesn't really exist until we came out with podcasting here. And, I'm a big believer that people can hear your facial expressions. Uh,
They can.
People can see if you're smiling. They tell your energy. And if you
Mhm.
want to convey something, you really need to convey it with your face on a podcast, even if it's only audio. Now, if it's
Mhm.
video, you really have a chance to convey things with your face. But if it's just audio, how you present yourself, where you're looking, what you're smiling, are you
Yeah.
bouncing off the other host? Is there another host, the guest? That all comes through. And if you're not doing that stuff, people are going to tune out
Yeah.
very quickly. And there's other things that, what's the environment? What's the lighting like? Well, what are you presenting to other people? These are all really important things on television. I mean, you can be too polished, I think, in the television world. People think of sort of the anchor with big hair and the big collar suits and things like that. And, I think you can sort of look silly to an extent, but I think you also don't want to be a sort of a schlub in a t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
Who hasn't shaved and the lighting is dark or the light is bright behind you and your face is dark. These are all things that if you're creating content, before you hit record, you want to think through, where
Mhm.
am I? What's the sound like? How am I going to edit this? What's the
Yeah.
point I want to make? And I think production, the act of producing, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else, is so important because you have to think these things through.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, think like a producer. If we're producing content, you're thinking, how is this going to look on screen? What am I going to
Yeah.
say? And a lot of people, the experts, for example, they want to be booked on traditional media. And I'm saying, well, if you want to be found, you need to be showing up on social. You need to be
Yeah.
showing up on YouTube, potentially on podcasts, because they want to start seeing that you have engagement, that you have a presence online, because that's going to make you more appealing to traditional media. And then when they're going into this new space, they don't know what to do. So they turn to their chat GPT or they turn to their Claude to give them scripts and ideas. And that's great. But you yourself need to be selling it. You need to be
Yeah.
crafting out your own persona, your own brand. And it sometimes makes me think of what it took to be a journalist, what it took to be on camera as a reporter in the beginning is what some of these people really need to apply to themselves now. And that's what makes you such a great guest. That journey from unknown to known is hard, and you became very known within our niche as a go-to reporter. When you're crafting out your stories, when you were a reporter, say for Fox News Channel, or say you're working at CNN as a contributor or a correspondent for
Yeah.
CNN, how do you come up with, like, the ideas and do you have any tips, like, for people, like, putting together your package stories?
Yeah, there's kind of two different types of stories that you do in news. There are
Mhm.
things where you're just reacting to what's happened at that exact moment, right? And that's where you have to bring in a lot of your experience. What has happened and what's the context and how do I convey this? And then there's other times when you get a couple days to think about a story, whether it's for an interview or, a lighter piece that has serious, okay, what pictures are we going to use? And you've got to
Mhm.
talk to your cameraman, your producer. Um, Interview people before you interview them, right? Talk to them.
Mhm.
One, that helps build a sense of relationship so that it's a more natural conversation, right, between two people.
Mhm.
But two, you're going to pick up on something that maybe is a helpful transition in the conversation. Whether it's a family member, an experience that person had, something that you relate to, something that they share with you. So, if you have the time, do that pre-interview, get to know them a little bit so that you have these moments where you can transition in the conversation so it feels more authentic, it feels more personable.
Mhm.
I think the other thing is especially when I do podcasts and serialized podcasts, I set out and try to think of what is the part of this story that I want somebody to go Google when they're listening to my story or watching.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said that to a couple people before, and they're kind of like, "Oh, I never thought about that." But I watch things, whether it's on Netflix or it's another streaming service or documentary, or listen to a podcast. As a curious person, I just say, "Oh, I got to Google it. Is this true? These two people went to high school together. They've known each other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I probably will get this wrong, but I want to say it was Jada Pinkett Smith and Tupac went to high school together. And I
I
remember
think
watching a
so.
Tupac
Yeah.
documentary, and they were like really good friends in Baltimore, and they were doing like Othello in high school. And then
Mm-hmm.
Tupac goes to Oakland and meets out with a bunch of different rappers, Digital Underground, and he basically becomes what we now know as Tupac. But at one point, he was a really serious art student who was hanging out and is good friends with, again, I think it was Jada Pinkett Smith, and they were doing Othello. And I remember hearing that or watching that and immediately Googling that and saying, is this true? Did they like, was that, Tupac is here, but
Yeah.
he's over here.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed to know more about this. And so when I'm
Yeah.
building out scripts, particularly long form content, I'm looking for things that I want people to stay engaged with. And it doesn't mean that they are diverting their attention is a bad thing, because sometimes you're Googling and you're listening to a podcast or you're watching a podcast. And the way we stay engaged now is often through our phones and look up other things. I mean, everyone who's ever watched a movie goes to IMDb these days to check out, oh, I remember that actor. What are they from?
Yeah.
And so if you are building something out, think about it before you hit record.
Mm-hmm.
What's an interesting little fact that might get somebody to continue to connect with what I'm talking about, but will also loop them back into wanting to know more about what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. No, and so to put you on the spot, because now I have to, like, if someone were to watch this, what would you want them to Google after hearing you?
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't thought this through, right? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always saw there was a time I went to high school with a classmate of mine by the name of Casey Crawford, and he played NFL football, and then started a mortgage company. And there were times when I was doing live shots on Fox. I was like Fox and Friends, and then he was coming up later on a money segment and things like that. And we
Oh,
weren't back to
fun.
back because they weren't having money segments right after news from the Middle East. But there were a
Mhm.
couple times where I remember talking or having the producer tell him that I was on before him and things like that. And it's just one of sort of those interesting things where you get people who from other parts of your life who end up
Mhm.
on shows that you've worked on and things like that, and you cross paths, and there's other journalists and stuff. I'll tell another story that just in terms of how good people on camera are. I remember being told by an executive at Fox that Shepard Smith was the best, or maybe the second best Ad-Libber on television. That Brian Gumbel and Shepard Smith were the two that you could throw anything at them at any moment, and they control IFB. They could do that. And I've
It's so
told this
true.
story before, where Shepard, we would be doing a live shot, and I would be talking, and he would text me during that, and then we might go to a sound bite, and I'd be responding, and then I would be texting him in this middle of this live shot, and he would be having this conversation about something totally different, and he was just that good. And I've told people, I'm like, go back and watch some of Shepard Smith's and live shots, newscasts, and things like that. He was so good at ad-libbing that sometimes if you're watching closely, you can see him coming and dropping off the BlackBerry, and he's probably having a conversation about like Mississippi football or something like that, or New Orleans music or
Yeah.
architecture. I don't know. It's just some random thing. But I've told people to go back, and they've actually gone back and looked to see.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I can see Shepard dropping his iPhone in the middle of this conversation. So that I would tell people, go back and have that look. You can probably find clips of him online.
Mhm. There was once this comment he made because they were banning cell phones at the time, and it was Blackberries, and he was like, on the BlackBerry, he's like, "I can use this better than I can chew a burger while driving. I can use this
Yeah,
better while driving than eating a burger." And I was like, "I believe it."
yeah. No, I believe it too. I believe it too. But it's funny because you can, if you're watching newscasts, you can sometimes see people doing these other things. And I don't mean like a source has just informed me of, and
Yeah.
then the sort of that dramatic thing. I mean, you can see people having their own lives in the middle of a
Mhm.
TV broadcast. It's just sort of
Yeah,
entertaining and
it is
funny.
really entertaining. I love that. That's really cool. And so with the podcasting that you've been working on, there's series that you have sold and you've done really well with the podcast series that you've created. There is that journalistic element to it
Yeah.
for all of what you've done. We had Carol Costello on who's been entering that space
Yep.
too in the audio crime space. And it does feel like that grassroots reporting in a lot of these podcast series. So now that you've pivoted into that place in your life and you're still working as a journalist at CNN as a contributor, more like a correspondent freelance, right?
Mostly producer these days, in all honesty. I mean,
Producer
I,
these
I
days?
do some on-air stuff for them very
Mhm.
rarely these days. I mean, during COVID, I was doing a lot of stuff for them.
Mhm.
The news industry has changed, but so
Yeah.
generally I tell people I am a freelance producer for CNN these days.
Yeah. And so I freelance as well at CNN as of this recording, we're recording in March.
Yep.
And, I'm curious about like the whole podcasting versus television versus YouTube, like where you see this whole space right now. You are still in it, like as a
Yeah.
journalist, as am I. And I see the evolution and it's very unique having one foot in the door.
Yeah. I still approach any story I work on. It doesn't matter what the medium is I want to be honest and truthful. I want to
Mhm.
present things accurately and fairly as I can. Now, what you can say in a 45-minute podcast or documentary is different than what you can say in a minute, right? But you need to keep the key information in there. You need to provide information that isn't distorting what your message is. And you also need to acknowledge that in 1 or 2 minutes, it's a different format than what you can do in 45 minutes, right?
Mhm.
So I think that is a really important part of storytelling is just knowing the medium and knowing what you have space to do. The other thing I have I have witnessed this sort of change, which I would say
Mhm.
that television, if you think of like 48 Hours or Dateline, they were very crime centric stories from the point of view of the criminal. And I think podcasting, one of the things I've noticed is that podcasting increasingly is from the point of view of the victims. And I think that's
Mhm.
actually a really good thing. I think in the podcasting world, we give a lot more space to the victim, a lot
Mhm.
more space to tell their story. It's a little bit less, look at this serial killer, isn't he so interesting? Which you still get a lot in television. And the reason I say this is that social media and podcasting allows people to be a little bit more vulnerable than television does, than traditional television. And traditional television, whether it's news or TV shows or sort of docudramas, there's still a formula that I'm not sure is as relevant to what we are consuming on social media,
Mm.
which you have to be a little bit more vulnerable, whether you're the person who is doing the interview, conducting the interview, presenting on the clip, or allowing the person who you are interviewing to be vulnerable as well. And I think that's actually a really good thing. So much of what TikTok and YouTube is people telling their own stories or allowing people to tell their own stories. And it's not as manufactured as it is in a television news clip or a television news documentary. It's a lot less scripted. And I don't mean scripted as like somebody told you what to say, but a lot
Yeah.
less pared down. And the
Mhm.
great thing about
I would agree.
podcasting, whether it's YouTube video or just a traditional audio podcast, is if the content is working, there is no hard out. Whereas anyone who's worked in television knows you have to have a hard out because of
Mhm.
commercials, end of show. So if it is really working for as you as a presenter, as a host, or you as a guest, let that breathe. You can go 35, 40 minutes. Now, if
Mhm.
it's not working and it's getting slow and boring, wrap it up, right? But if you're doing a video and it's really an engaging conversation for your audience, go long. It doesn't matter. Whereas in television, like you're just picking the best bits, and you might have to fight for that extra soundbite, but you're not
Mhm.
going to get an extra 12 minutes on something on television, right? It's not the way TV works. But if you are the producer or the host, as you are telling a story, if it's working, let it let it breathe, let it run. You can take some time and let people have sort of those emotional connections with the
Mhm.
audience.
Yeah, and it's important, for that too, and I
Yeah,
think you brought up a really good point that I'm seeing right now as I'm saying it's March 2026, we're having the war with Iran spill out all over social media, and what I'm seeing is the journalist turning into the influencer. I'm seeing, Jake Tapper, Raw, talking about his conversation with Trump, not looking how he looks on CNN, being very casual. Clarissa Ward, for example, we're
yeah,
staying with CNN here, packing her bags, showing people what it's like to leave her family. It's not just at CNN, you're seeing it across the board.
yeah,
All these different journalists are putting themselves on social more than I've seen before. And it's almost as if they're finally, traditional media is finally catching up with we need to build trust online for
yeah.
people to come and see us on linear, on those those big shows, because they are on YouTube. You can get CNN on YouTube, you can get it on
Right.
streaming, you can get NBC, ABC. They need you to go there. They need you to want to be there. So I'm curious, what's your take on what you're seeing on social now and your thoughts on the future right now with traditional media?
It's interesting because I think at the height of the Iraq War and into the Afghan War, which was sort of a 20-year period,
Yeah.
the way journalists made their names was being in the thick of something exploding or gunfire, right?
Yeah.
Um, and if you go back to the early days of the Iraq War with Richard Engel
Mhm.
and, even the early days of the first Iraq War with Bernie Shaw and others, like being in the thick of it was a really dramatic thing.
Yeah.
And we've joked about this with other reporters and other producers and people is like, it doesn't matter how much gunfire or explosions there are around you these days. That doesn't actually drive much interest because we've had so much of it for the last 20 years. I mean, unfortunately, our culture has been inundated by explosions and war. And that
Mhm.
that rawness doesn't, I don't think, translate very well. And I mean, it does in certain moments, but I think people are much more interested in understanding what life is like. Where do you go when bombs are falling in a
Mm.
city? What are you packing? How are you balancing work life relationships? I mean, that is a part of social media today with what's going on in Iran, what's going on in Jerusalem, and places like that. You're seeing that more and more. I have mixed feelings. I'll be honest. I'm not 100% sure that it's always a good thing. I'm not.
Mhm.
I have feelings about like if I was reporting right now, would
Yeah.
I wanna be that vulnerable? And I'm not sure that's my personality, in all honesty,
Mhm.
and I think watching some of these reporters try to be that person, can be difficult, but I think there are other people who just do it naturally, particularly younger reporters. And there are people who have put their entire lives out. They've grown up online, and I
Yeah.
do think it is much more natural for them. Also presents problems. What do you put online? I still think about what I put online. Who am I liking and things like that, and what am I not liking? I do worry about that. There's a lot of people just I don't care. This is my life, and I'm going to live it.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's Taylor Lorenz is somebody who is a technology reporter. I mean, her entire life is out there, right? And
Mhm.
I watch that, and I think I just couldn't do that. I mean, she's crying on camera, she's
Yeah.
crying in interviews, and she's attacking people. She's being attacked. She's responding, and whatever you think about her reporting one way or another, like that is an incredible vulnerability that I personally can't handle.
No,
And I'm
I
not sure I
couldn't
would
do.
want to, but she's a different
Mhm.
generation of a reporter and she's not alone. But I do think that vulnerability, that space to sort of tell your story,
Mhm.
it is a really important part of being authentic these days.
Mhm.
And I think people can also criticize you for being inauthentic because you're
Yeah.
too vulnerable. I mean, you're not going to win in social media, right? But I think the conversation you're having about like as you try to figure out who you are when you're hosting social media or doing interviews, you have to figure out like what am I comfortable sharing with? How far
Mhm.
am I willing to go? And that's a discussion you really should have with yourself, with other people, your team.
Mhm.
And I'm curious in terms of the people you're talking to,
Mhm.
how much of that goes into the conversations pre hit record?
hmm Well, a lot of the times I will tell people you need to understand that putting yourself out there requires you to determine how much of you want to share. And I
Yep.
always say you want to pick your four pillars, the four pillars of like the legs that hold your chair up.
Yeah.
What are they and what are you willing to repeat content around? Is it
Right.
your family? If it is, how much of your family? Do you want them
Right.
to know where your kids are going to play basketball? Like,
Right.
is that necessary? And in some cases it is. They're niche experts within a certain county and they want people to know how involved they are. But if once they start going into that national space, I'm like, we need to start honing this in because how
Yeah.
much of you do you really want out there? And I had this other conversation where I mentioned how before I decided I want to start showing up on camera on YouTube in my own way as a producer, giving people that
Yeah.
producer's lens, I went through the internet and I scrubbed it. Like,
Interesting.
what's out there of me? Like, what have other people posted that maybe I don't want a picture
Yeah.
online of? And I would say, hey, could you mind removing that? Hey, I know I was at this party, but I'm really trying to make sure that I control everything that I share
Right.
online. And, even if there was a photographer at an event I was hosting. If I was like, you know what, that's not really reflective of who I am now, take it down. I don't want
Yeah.
it. I had a video of me singing karaoke. Very, very
I
basic.
feel like karaoke is one of those things that people are like, can we get
Everyone
that taken
has.
down?
But I'm like, can we just take that down? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's more of just you need to really curate who you want to show. But
Yeah.
what I'm personally liking, is that the journalists are giving us more. And I know they're in dangerous situations with the war in Iran. And it helps me want to see their report more. And this
Yeah.
just maybe because I'm a news junkie, but I'm hoping that it's translating to other people in the scroll being like, wow, Fred Pleitgen, he was in on this roof and oil was raining down. And I'm like, Fred, oh my gosh, stay safe. Like to me, I'm like, oh my gosh. But everyone else, you could see the likes because they're just
Yeah.
like, I had no idea.
Right.
Like, this is crazy. And, Richard Engel, he was talking about how this isn't a world war. He's like, we're not there yet. And here's why, because he has that depth of knowledge
Yeah.
to share. It's like, I want to hear that. Where
Yeah.
before, your opinion is your opinion. You shouldn't be sharing it. Now it's like, well, you're the reporter on the ground. You're like, I kind of want to know what you're
Yeah.
saying, like what you think, because you know better than anyone else. So
Yeah.
it is an interesting time right now in social media and in journalism for
Well,
sure.
my
At
mind
least I see.
immediately went to Fred Pleitgen as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one, because he's a friend, and just I've always respected his work. I mean, I
Mhm.
some of the criticism he's gotten about being in Iran right now, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Okay, he can't say everything he wants to say. He's not going to report on every single thing, but he's giving us a glimpse, a really well informed glimpse, because he's been there a lot of times, into what's going on. And there's other people who can provide other context. Like, if you're watching news properly, you're not relying on just one segment for all of your information, right? And cable news wants you to keep watching. But like Fred is providing us with a glimpse of information that we just wouldn't get anywhere else. What are the streets
No.
like? And nobody, Fred's not gonna hide information because somebody says you're not allowed to do this. Like, he's a creative reporter who knows how to get the most important information out to viewers. And he's got to do it carefully, and he's not going to do it so that he gets himself thrown out. But like, it's raining oil in Tehran. Like, that right there is why he's there, to tell us that. Forget about
Yeah,
everything else. He's not there to hold everybody accountable and to argue with the supreme leader and this deputy supreme leader. Like, he's there to give us a glimpse of what life is like in Tehran right now.
exactly.
And that is so valuable as somebody who likes to consume news and wants to know what's going on.
Yeah, as a news junkie, I keep referring to myself as it's like I'm just obsessed because it really has always been the window
Yeah.
into the world. And right now, seeing it the way I've only been able to see it in the control room on social is incredible because I remember having conversations with Fred before a shot and he would be like, "You can't wait till you see what I'm at." And
Yeah.
he would show me. But now he's showing the world on
Right.
social the moments that he couldn't show sometimes on air because he didn't have enough time,
Right.
or he had a tripod and he didn't have a camera that could move. It's like seeing them in this way now is so I love it. And Matt Rivers, he was like on a building, like walking up the steps up and showing like what he's seeing. And it's like, this is what journalism is right
Yeah.
now. It's on my feed, it's in my scroll, it's in a podcast, it's on YouTube. I'm not really going to the TV, but I will if it's breaking news.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm getting so much in my scroll because I curate my algorithm to give it to me, right?
Yeah.
And that's kinda how it needs to be, I guess, now. I don't know. You
Yeah.
gotta tell the feed what they
Social
give you.
media the social media is dangerous if you are following the wrong people. And it can
Yes.
push you into the wrong people very easily. But uh, I try, like you, talking about curation, like
Mhm.
I try to follow people who I really know and trust. And that
Yeah.
cuts across a lot of different organizations.
Yeah.
It also is not always news people. Sometimes it's just
Mhm.
really smart analysts. I mean, there's a guy I follow on social media who's like an arms control expert. And I
Oh,
don't see him
cool.
popping up on news, but he has incredibly insightful information about what are we actually talking about highly enriched uranium.
Mhm.
And what's the procedures for moving it if we were to send in U.S. troops into Iran to try to remove it and things like that. And I I I remember when I was in Jerusalem covering the region and things like that. People would talk about, oh, we're going to go bomb Iran. We're going to go bomb Iran, and it's just as easy. We should just take out the Ayatollah and we just bomb Iran and we'll end the nuclear program. And I remember telling people, I'm like, you understand how terribly difficult it is to destroy a nuclear program that is had years, if not decades,
Yeah.
to bunker themselves in. And I think what we're finding right now is that all of this cheering for bombing Iran and destroying their nuclear program 6 months ago, well, didn't really succeed. Um,
Mhm.
maybe it should have been done, maybe it shouldn't have done, but like it didn't really succeed for all the reasons that people were saying. Like, you better be prepared that this might not work and that you're going to start a larger conflict. And that's where we're at
Mhm.
right now. And
Truly.
you don't always get those voices on television and in newspapers. Sometimes you get those in social media to explain these things a little bit more. And I think that's where social media, if you're curating your feed, is so valuable. Now, it can also take you down the path of like, do this, don't do that. And that's all you get fed. And that can be very polarizing and very disruptive as well to people who are trying to consume news. But if you are curating your feed and you're trying to be educated, there are lots of really smart people out there helping you
Mhm.
understand this stuff.
And I keep telling experts, I'm like, this is where you need to be showing up. You need
Yeah.
to show up on the social media feed if you are the expert that can add value to whatever news story is happening.
Yeah.
If it's a trend or a news story, show up because that could be your moment. Producers are there looking.
Yeah.
So be there so you can, get that chance. And I didn't expect to go here so much with Iran, but I mean, it is so unique to see it unfold in my feed. Having been in TV news my whole life, right? I didn't really turn to my feed even after I left CNN full time. It was like I went there to look for trends. Went there to look for what are people talking about on Twitter and journalism and what stories are people, discussing about in our niche online. But I didn't go there on a daily basis until really after leaving. And
Interesting.
now this is really the first conflict that's visible in my feed. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
seeing like oil rain. I'm seeing places being bombed. And I think that, this is, if maybe I'm wrong, but like for me, it just feels like I am seeing it in real time. And it's so unique to everything we have in our background.
Yeah, I
It's
mean, I
just
think it
so
really started
cool.
when the October 7th and the war in Gaza. Like, we got to see
Very
things
true.
because of social media that we just had never seen before, and I think this is kind of all a continuation of the same war. I mean, let's be honest, like,
Yeah.
this is a regional conflict that is all grouped together.
Mhm.
One of the things that always really bothered me in television
Mhm.
is the catch-all security analyst or the catch-all
Yeah.
political analyst who is asked to talk about everything. They get on television because they're really smart on topic A, And then because brokers and producers need a smart person, they then have them talk on topic B, C, D, E, F, Z, right?
Which they have yeah.
No, yeah. I'm always wary of those people on social media as well.
Mhm.
But one of the things I do appreciate about really good social media feeds are the people who are an expert in their fields and they're understanding that this is their lane. And I think,
Mhm.
if you're trying to go from unknown to known, part of it is understanding that you need to know what you are providing to the viewer or the listener. And you also need to know what you don't know and be honest about that. And I think some of the trust that's been lost in traditional news media is because there are people who are being asked to talk about Iran who are North Korea or Asia
Mhm.
specialists, or people who are Middle East specialists who are talking about Asia specialisms. I think there are people who are specialists about like internal Israeli politics
Mhm.
who are then describing Iranian politics, having never set foot in the country before, right? Or European politics, trying to explain what's going on in Jordan. And, I think those are actually really damaging to trust in the television news world
Mm.
because you might have some knowledge, but are you the right person to be conveying what little knowledge you have on this topic just because you have a lot of knowledge on another topic?
Yeah.
And staying in your lane is something that like I think is really important. And I think the really good people who are doing it well on social media. There's a analyst by the name of Holly Digress who's a friend, and she is super great on Iran. But one of the things that her real expertise on Iran is young people's how they use social media and how the youth of Iran are developing, and it's been developing over a couple of decades now. And yes, she understands a lot of the dynamics of Iranian politics, and she can talk about that. But her real expertise is on sort of how the youth and
Mm.
trends in Iran are developing in light of these conflicts and things like that. And she's not going to try to give you everything about Iran, where there are people that I'm like, you have no real connection to this country, and yet you are pontificating about all things Iran, and you're sitting in another city in another country and things like that. So, I think looking out for the people who are really knowledgeable and not strained into other topics. It's one of the things that infuriates me about Joe Rogan.
Mm.
Joe Rogan has a huge audience. And I was talking to a friend who was like, well, Joe Rogan has both sides on. I'm like, how do you know he has both sides on?
Mm.
Joe Rogan doesn't know what both sides of most stories are.
Mhm.
He's a comedian, he's a really good podcaster. But like, whether it's talking about medical issues or vaccines or talking about the height of conflicts around the world, I'm not sure that we are covering all the topics. I'm not sure he's always having it, and I don't mean to just single out him,
No,
but I
no.
just mean that shows that try to be a catch-all for everything
Mhm.
often are really unreliable informations for the things you care about. And
Yeah.
if you're trying to present yourself on camera, understand what your lane and your expertise is. Because once you try
Mhm.
to be a pontificator about all things, there's a million people that are doing that, and very few of them are doing it well. So the more you understand, like, what do I offer a listener or a viewer, is going to help you. I think in crafting your social media image, your on camera image.
Mhm. I would agree, and this is all stuff I'm passionate about, just where we are as a country online and how people can really start showing up, so I'm
Yeah.
really glad we got to dig into what I've been just obsessed with on my feed lately, which is Iran. Now, you develop podcasts for other people, and, how can people work with you? How can you help them craft out their own podcast ideas, or how can you coach them on how to show up on camera?
Yeah, I'm always willing to help. I mean, the company that I run is called District Bear Media. We're based in Los Angeles. It's a nod to California with the bear, and Washington D.C., where my wife and I are both from originally as well. We work on all different types of projects. I mean, we've done documentaries, we've done podcast production. We have done, my wife writes books. So we do a little bit of everything. And I've done large events, I've done small events. I've helped people craft speeches and website production. I think whatever your message is and however you are thinking you want to get your message out, There's a lot of really talented former news people like
Hmm.
yourself, like me, who have a lot of experience on how do you present what you want to present to other people. And I'm always willing to help. I know you are as well. And I think that's if you're trying to figure this out, you need to think these things through before you hit record.
Yeah. And it's all about packaging. Like you want to have a full package online
Yeah.
because if you were out in the Middle East covering a story, chances are you weren't going to then be weighing in on US politics unless it directly tied to Middle
No,
East. That's where
exactly.
you're located.
Yeah.
So it's all about packaging who you are, your expertise, and what you want to be when you show up online. And I like to focus on the fact that you do help people with building out their podcast ideas. How can they reach out to you? Where should we direct them?
Yeah, so our website is District Bear Media. You can reach us out at media at District Bear Media. That's our website. We're always working with different clients. Some of it's corporate, some of it are people who are trying to launch podcasts. If you've got a podcast idea, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk you through. I've done lots of pilots.
Hmm.
I love podcasting. I think probably what you figured out is it's a really fun way to connect with people and to have really interesting conversations that you just don't get to have in a lot of other places. So yeah, I'm always willing to work with people, always looking for new ideas and to work with people who have something to say and are trying to figure out a way to express what they want to say.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll make sure that I put all your links in the description. Is there any other tips or tricks you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I think it goes back to the advice that I got when I was sort of first starting out. Which is you really have to find out who you are,
Yeah.
and that doesn't happen overnight. It can take some time, but you have to figure out who you want to be on camera, and you have to figure out who you are on camera. And sometimes those are different things, but you have to find a way to merge those two. Um, the other thing I would say is there's always another take.
Mm.
Like when you're recording things, I have definitely screwed up in live shots on live television. And the nice thing is there's always another take. There's always another
Yeah.
opportunity. And you do get to correct the record if you make a mistake. You do get to update information as it comes in. And that's a really important thing to do. All of this is evolving. And you need to evolve with it and have that fun with the evolution of it.
Hmm.
And even if you're talking about something serious, there is still an opportunity to continue to bring information and evolve in this conversation that you're having with your viewers and your listeners.
Yeah. Oh, that's all really great. And I'm so glad we could have this conversation and share our expertise. And since we
Yeah.
wound up talking about Iran, I may have to push this out this week as of this recording, guys.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you may be
Go
getting
for
a bonus episode.
it.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let me stop that. Thanks for watching this episode of Unknown to Known. I'm really glad Connor could join us. We've been in touch on LinkedIn for so long. And I just wanted to also flag another episode that you might find interesting if you really loved this one. I have a conversation with Cody Thomas, and he is on Court TV. And he talks about how he went from an MMJ to anchor. So check out that episode. And be sure to find us on Instagram. There's all these links in the description to everything Connor has spoke about. So be sure to check that out. And I'll see you guys online. Bye.